It is the autumn of 1888. London is the largest city in the world, 4.5 million people, the greatest empire in history. And somewhere in these streets, in this half-mile of alleys, lodging houses, and market yards in the East End, a killer is operating that no one can catch. Over 10 weeks, 5 women are murdered. The police interview thousands of people. They receive hundreds of letters. They follow dozens of suspects. They never make a single arrest. This is Whitechapel. And using AI reconstruction tools, we're going to walk through it, street by street, the way it actually looked in 1888. What you're about to see might change how you think about this case entirely. To understand what happened in the autumn of 1888, you first have to understand where it happened. Whitechapel in the 1880s is not the London of Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey. It is the other London. Packed into roughly a square mile east of the City of London is one of the most densely populated places on the planet. You can see it in this reconstruction. Commercial Street, the main artery through the district, is never quiet. Market traders, rag merchants, slaughterhouses, tanneries, breweries, leather couriers. The smell alone would stop most people in their tracks. Cattle blood from the abattoirs, coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys, the mudflats of the Thames 2 streets south. The poverty here is not accidental. Whitechapel has been filling up for decades with migrants from Ireland, from Eastern Europe, from across the British Empire, all drawn to the docks and the factories. The infrastructure never kept pace. The streets designed for horse carts are now carrying 10 times the traffic. Courts and alleyways that once housed 1 family now hold 6. Whitechapel had over 200 registered common lodging houses by 1888. On any given night, somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 people were sleeping in them. 4pence a bed, no questions asked. These were not shelters of last resort. For a significant portion of the working population of the East End, this was simply where you lived. The women who would become the Ripper's victims lived in this world, not because they were reckless or careless, but because this was the world available to them. It's important we understand that before we go any further. Now, the police. H Division of the Metropolitan Police was responsible for Whitechapel. Around 500 officers for 80,000 residents. No forensic science, no fingerprinting. That technology existed but wasn't used in criminal investigation yet. No photographs taken of crime scenes as standard procedure. Detection meant witnesses. Witnesses meant trust. And trust between the police and the people of Whitechapel was, at best, complicated. Before we walk through what happened, we should talk about who it happened to. The 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper are often reduced to a list of names and dates. That reduction does them a disservice. Each of them had a life that extended far beyond the autumn of 1888. Mary Ann Nichols was 43 years old. She'd been married, had 5 children, and had spent the last years of her life moving between workhouses and lodging houses in the East End. On the night of the 31st of August, she needed 4pence for a bed. She'd been drinking. She went back out onto the streets to find the money. Annie Chapman was 47. She sold flowers and did occasional crochet work to get by. She was known in the Whitechapel lodging houses as sociable, good-natured. She was killed on the 8th of September in the backyard of a lodging house on Hanbury Street, in full daylight, with 17 people sleeping in the building behind her. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed on the same night, the 30th of September. 2 murders, 45 minutes apart, less than half a mile from each other. Elizabeth in a yard off Burner Street. Catherine in Mitre Square, just inside the boundary of the City of London, a different police jurisdiction entirely. Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest, 25 years old, Irish-born. But she was the only one killed indoors, in her single rented room at 13 Miller's Court, Dorset Street. She was killed on the 9th of November, 1888. After her death, the murders stopped. 5 women, 10 weeks. The same half-mile of streets. Bucks Row, 31st of August, 1888, just after 3:40 in the morning. This reconstruction shows you exactly what it looked like. Take a moment with it. It's a narrow back street, barely wide enough for a cart to pass. There is one gas lamp at the far end. On either side, the blank brick walls of warehouses and stables. This is not a street where you linger. A cart driver named Charles Cross is walking to work when he sees something on the pavement. He thinks at first it's a tarpaulin left out. He walks closer. It is Mary Ann Nichols. The police are called. The doctor arrives within 20 minutes. His estimate? She had been dead for less than 30 minutes. The killer had been in this street sometime around 3:15 a.m. Hundreds of people lived within a few hundred meters. A police constable had walked this exact route less than 30 minutes before. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had heard anything. 8 days later, Annie Chapman is found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The yard is accessible from the street through a passageway in the building. The door to that passageway was never locked. The time of death is estimated between 5:30 and 6 in the morning. It is nearly daylight. There are people sleeping in the building. The yard backs onto other properties where workers are already beginning their day. And the killer carried out this murder in conditions that should have made it impossible to go undetected. He was not seen. He was not heard. He left no physical evidence that could be traced. Here's what I find genuinely difficult to get my head around. We're not talking about remote, isolated locations. These murders happened in some of the most densely populated streets in the world, which raises a question the police themselves couldn't answer. Was the killer someone who belonged in these streets? Someone no one would have looked at twice? After Annie Chapman, the investigation changes shape, because the press gets involved. On the 27th of September, a letter arrives at the Central News Agency in London. It's written in red ink. The writer claims to be responsible for the murders and promises more. And he signs it, Jack the Ripper. The letter was almost certainly written by a journalist. Most serious historians today believe it was a hoax. But it didn't matter. The name went into the newspapers the following day, and from that point forward, the story was no longer a police investigation. It was a national sensation. The press coverage made the job of the police almost impossible. Witnesses were approached by journalists before they could speak to detectives. Every rumor became a front page. The killer, whoever he was now performing for an audience of millions. Then comes the 30th of September. What would become known as the double event. Elizabeth Stride is killed in a yard off Berner Street sometime around 12:45 in the morning. Less than a mile away, and 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes is found in Mitre Square. Here is the problem for the police. Berner Street falls under H Division, the Metropolitan Police. Mitre Square falls under the City of London Police, an entirely separate force with no shared communication system, no shared command structure. 2 murders in one night, on either side of a jurisdictional boundary. The investigation was already fractured. This made it worse. By the end of September, the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has resigned. The Home Secretary is answering questions in Parliament. The investigation is being run by committee, by political pressure, and by public panic. Not exactly ideal conditions for catching a serial killer. Dorset Street. By 1888, it had a reputation as the most dangerous street in London. Yet this reconstruction gives you a sense of the place. It is essentially a short stretch of road lined with lodging houses, connecting Commercial Street to a series of courts and alleyways behind it. One of those alleyways is Miller's Court. Number 13 is a single ground floor room. The window faces the court. The door opens directly onto it. Mary Jane Kelly had been living there for several months. She was behind on her rent. On the evening of the 8th of November, she was seen drinking in a pub on Commercial Street. She was seen outside her room later that night. At some point between approximately midnight and 4 in the morning, she was killed. The body was discovered at 10:45 the following morning when her landlord sent a man round to collect the overdue rent. He looked through the broken window. The catch on it had been broken for some time, and he went immediately to fetch the police. What they found in that room was different in kind from the previous murders. The killer had, for the first time, been completely private. No streets to watch, no passers-by to avoid, no constable on a beat to worry about. After Mary Jane Kelly, the murders stopped. No arrest, no trial, no confession that held up. The Whitechapel murders file was kept open by the Metropolitan Police until 1892. Jack the Ripper was never identified. So, who was he? Over the past 135 years, more than 100 individuals have been seriously proposed as Jack the Ripper. The list includes doctors, barristers, artists, Polish immigrants, a member of the royal family, and a famous Victorian painter. During the investigation itself, the police focused primarily on men from the Whitechapel area, with some connection to the lodging house world. A Polish barber called John Pizer, known locally as Leather Apron, was arrested, held, and released when his alibi checked out. Inspector Frederick Aberline, who led the ground investigation, never officially named a prime suspect. In retirement, he reportedly favored a Polish-born barber called Seweryn Klosowski, a man who was later convicted of poisoning 3 wives. But Klosowski's murders bore no resemblance to the Ripper killings, and most historians discount the connection. The most discussed suspect in modern scholarship is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-born Jewish man who lived in Whitechapel and was known to the police at the time. In 2014, a DNA analysis of a shawl allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder produced mitochondrial DNA consistent with Kosminski's family line. The methodology of that study has been disputed extensively. The debate continues. I'm genuinely curious what people think about this. If you've looked into the Ripper case at all, I'd like to know, who do you think was most likely responsible? Put it in the comments. I read them, and the range of theories people bring to this case is remarkable. Here is what strikes me most about the autumn of 1888. Walking through these reconstructions, the murders of 5 women in Whitechapel became the most famous unsolved case in history. They generated more newspaper coverage, more political attention, more public outcry than almost any crime that had come before. And yet, the conditions that made those women vulnerable had been visible for decades. The overcrowded lodging houses, the lack of safe employment for women, the streets that were too dark, too narrow, and too ignored by city planners who lived in other parts of London. None of that was hidden. All of it had been reported. None of it had been fixed. The murders did accelerate slum clearance efforts in Whitechapel. Charitable organizations expanded their work significantly in the years after 1888. The political pressure generated by the case forced attention onto the East End that it had never received before. But it had taken 5 killings to do it. Whitechapel today still carries traces of 1888. Hanbury Street still runs through Spitalfields. Mitre Square still exists in the City of London, the geometry of it almost unchanged. But Dorset Street is gone, built over in the early 20th century, but Miller's Court is roughly where the car park behind the market now stands. These are not distant, abstract places. They are streets that people walk through today. Jack the Ripper was never caught. Probably never will be. But the streets where it happened are still there. The geography of it is still there. And sometimes that's the most honest thing history can offer us. Not answers, but a place to stand and think about the right questions. If you want to see more reconstructions like this, other cities, other moments in history, other crimes that shaped the world, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. And drop your Ripper theory in the comments. Seriously, this is one of those cases where I learn something new every time I read what people have to say about it.